Hi, this is Chris again with Nightfall Audiobooks, and I have for you this week Party Summer by R.L. Stine. This is the first ever super chiller, and it's taken me quite a long time to get to it, but I'm finally getting to it. Part of the reason why it takes me so long to get to these books is because I need to do one or two Fear Street novels, then I do a super chiller, and then I do a Fear Street novel or two. Then I go into a point horror novel. Then I go back to Fear Street for a few novels, and I come back. Sometimes I'll do a project, like I'll do a cheerleader's book instead of a point horror novel, or I'll do the Cataluna Chronicles, or I'll do the babysitter. I have to stagger it when I record and when I release stuff because you don't want to have just a glut of Fear Street novels and then no point horror and then no super chillers to break it up. So that's why I do it this way. By following this strange recording schedule, that makes Party Summer, Goodnight Kiss, and Goodnight Kiss 2 the three final books that I have to read that are super chillers. So this is part of the end of the super chillers. Granted, there's only 12 of these super chillers, while there's 50 or so Fear Street novels, and around 20 or so point horror novels. The other problem this book has is I've read a good chunk of this already, and it's very big, and it's very long, and there's a million characters in this novel, and when I started reading this, it was, I think spring of 2021, and I was like, wow, I don't think I have the chops for this yet. Why don't I do some books that I'm familiar with, that I really, really love, and hopefully I can get my voices ironed out before I tackle this book. If you've been following me for a little while, and I hope you have, you will remember Halloween Party. There are 8 or so characters in that novel, and I had the exact same problem. I had so many characters on screen, if you will, that I just could not keep all of the voices straight, and try as I might, I could not pull it off. And I fear that will be the problem with Party Summer. But we're going to try our best, and I hope it all works out in the end. I have read a few of these chapters, but again, that was in 2021, and I don't recall what I read then, now. This will be the first time reading this book for me. So let's see what this is all about. If you're not familiar with the Super Chiller format, they tend to be a little bit longer than the Fear Street novels. They are around 200 pages or so, while Fear Street novels dance around 150, 160 pages. Fear Street novel is around 3 hours long when it's all done being edited and things. That usually gets me 5 or 6 episodes per book. The Super Chillers tend to take a little while longer to tell because they're just longer stories. So I expect this book to take a little while to tell. Anyway, let's begin. What should I read next? I don't know. Please send me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube @nightfallaudiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I love your comments and seeing what you have to say. Tell me anything. Tell me what you're thinking. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. Any help would be greatly appreciated. Tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales from R.L. Stine. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Party Summer by R.L. Stine, a Fear Street Super Chiller, Book 1. Part 1. Chapter 1. Sheets of rain thundered down onto the roof, a steady drum roll. The gusting wind forced a slender tree branch to click against the attic window. Tap, 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 like bony fingers trying to get in. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, its shrillness muffled by the heavy curtain of rain. Jan closed her eyes and tried to shut out all sound. No distractions, she thought, sweeping her black hair over her shoulder with a quick motion of her head. Go away, world. Go away. Eyes closed, her features tightened into an expression of intense concentration. She forced the sounds from her mind. The roar of the rain became a gentle hum and then disappeared completely. The wind slowed, then hushed. The siren vanished into the distance. Go away, world. Go away. On her knees on the attic floor, Jan was assaulted by a sour, musty smell, a mixture of mildew, old newspapers, dampness, and dust. It invaded her nose, caught in her throat. I've got to shut the smells out, too, she thought, holding her breath. I've got to shut out everything, clear my mind, and concentrate. Downstairs, the dog was barking, excited, high-pitched yips. Jan opened her large, dark eyes, then rolled them in disgust. Can't they keep that mutt quiet? Foxy would be angry at me for calling him a mutt, she thought, a smile forcing its way across her serious face. She waited for the dog to stop yipping, heard a door slam, heard the phone ring, once, twice. Is anyone down there? Is anyone going to answer it? The attic floor creaked. The rain continued to pound on the roof just above her head. She could hear the splash of water overflowing the gutter. Jan glanced back over her shoulder toward the attic steps. Amazing how much you can hear, even with the attic door closed, she thought. Amazing how hard it is to shut out the world, even when you really try. She turned back, squatting on her knees, and set her features, concentrating with her new dedication. Leaning forward, she reached out and allowed her hand to trace the outlines of the pentacle she had drawn in white chalk on the wooden attic floorboards. First the 5-pointed star, then the circle around the star. The wood felt warm beneath her fingers. She ran her hand along the circle again. Again. The light from the window dimmed. She looked up at a green-gray sky, heavy and near. A ghostly sky, she thought. A very promising sky. The floor beneath her seemed to grow even warmer. She stared at the pea-soup sky until she felt absorbed by it, lost in it. Everything became a green-gray, shadowless blur. Then she shut her eyes. The roar of the rain began to fade. The fingers ceased their tapping against the dusty windowpane. Go away, world. Go away. Jan concentrated hard, remembering the instructions she had read, all of the books she had practically memorized, remembering all the accounts she had spent so many hours poring over, absorbing, studying until she was ready for her own encounter. Her hand continued to trace the chalk circle and star, slowly at first, then faster, until the wood burned her fingertips. Faster, faster. The floor was heating up now. The circle, a chalky smear, seemed to raise up beneath her fingers. Yes, yes. The world was gone. The heavy, noisy world was far away. The spirit world was moving closer. Jan could feel it under her fingertips as they circled the floor, growing hot, hotter, until they weren't part of her any longer, until she wasn't part of her own fingers, until she wasn't part of the world, until she was no longer on her knees on the attic floor, no longer in her house, no longer anywhere. The spirit was so close to her now, the spirit she had summoned from the other side. A chill ran down the length of her body, making her shudder. Success! It was working. She knew it was working. She could feel the ghostly presence. She could feel it hovering over her, circling her like a dark, silent hawk. She could feel its warmth now as it moved closer. Yes, yes, yes. She could definitely feel the presence, sense it without seeing it, feel that it was watching her, preparing to make contact. The spirit was behind her now. She could feel the heat on her back, feel her dark hair tingle with electricity. I know you're here, Jan said, her voice a whisper, a tremor of sound. I know you're here. Silence. Too excited to breathe, dizzy with the power she had summoned, Jan opened her eyes. Slowly, expectantly, she turned her head. What are you doing here? She cried. Chapter 2. Carrie stood on the top attic step, her mouth hanging open in surprise and confusion. Eric laughed and slapped Craig's hand in a high five. What are you doing here? Jan repeated angrily, scrambling up from her position on the floor, violently dusting off her jeans with both hands. She tossed back her black hair, her dark eyes flashing at her three friends. Carrie, Eric, and Craig made no attempts to move from the steps. At first, Carrie had been startled by the scene she and the two boys had found in the attic, and now she was startled by Jan's angry reaction at being discovered. I didn't know you were a witch, Craig said, his expression blank, not revealing whether he was joking or not. Eric laughed uncomfortably. Of course we knew, he joked. Couldn't you tell from those pointy hats she always wears? I thought those fit her head, Craig replied, and the two of them burst out in loud laughter that echoed through the low, narrow attic. You're not funny, Jan said, and her expression turned from anger to hurt. You had no business sneaking up here and spying on me. Her voice trembled with emotion, and her eyes blinked as if holding back tears. I'm sorry, Carrie said, finally snapping out of her trance. Really, Jan? We didn't know? Your mom said you were up here? That's right, Eric said quickly, tugging at his short ponytail. We asked her if it was okay to come up, and she said yes. A burst of wind lashed the house. The attic window rattled, and the tree limb slammed hard against it. Startled by the sound, all 4 teenagers looked to the window. When Carrie peered at Jan again, she saw that her friend had gotten herself together. I didn't hear you come up, Jan said, pulling nervously at a strand of hair, curling it in a corkscrew around her finger. I didn't know how you missed us. Those stairs creaked like crazy, Craig said. Yeah, we made a lot of noise, Carrie added. She moved off the step and moved toward Jan, ducking her head under the low eaves. I was concentrating, Jan said, glancing down at the smeared chalk pentacle on the floor and frowning. We won't tell anyone you've gone crazy, Eric said, grinning. I haven't gone crazy, Jan snapped, her anger returning. It almost worked. It would have worked if you hadn't... What almost worked? Carrie asked, lowering herself onto the cushioned window seat in front of the rattling attic window and tucking her slender legs under her. Never mind, Jan muttered. No, really, Carrie insisted. What were you doing? You just want to laugh at me, Jan said, crossing her arms over her chest and staring out at the rain. We won't laugh. Promise, Eric said, glancing at Craig. Promise, Craig repeated obediently. I was summoning a ghost, Jan told them. Eric and Craig burst out laughing. Come on, guys, Carrie pleaded. Jan ignored them and faced Carrie. So, what are you 3 doing here anyway? We came to tell you we can go, Carrie replied. To Piney Island? Jan asked, her dark eyes glowing in the gray light from the window. Yeah, Carrie said. Do you believe it? My parents actually agreed. That's great, Jan cried excitedly, momentarily forgetting her anger. My Aunt Rose will be so happy. I'll have to call her and tell her right away. She turned back to the 2 boys on the stairs. But maybe you shouldn't go. Huh? Craig asked. What do you mean? Eric demanded, equally surprised. Well, those old New England inns are all haunted, you know, Jan said. So? Eric asked, leaning on Craig's shoulder. We don't believe in that stuff, Craig said, grinning and staring down at the smeared remains of Jan's pentacle on the floor. That's what I mean, Jan said, her expression almost threatening. Ghosts in old inns usually have stories to tell, violent stories, bloody stories, and they don't like to be laughed at. Her eyes burned into Eric's as she said those words. He lowered his eyes to stare at his shoes. You mean, Craig started uncertainly. I mean, you could get hurt, Jan said heatedly. If you laugh at them the way you laughed at me, you could get hurt. Carrie shivered and jumped up from the window seat. Despite the steamy heat of the attic, something about Jan's tone made Carrie feel cold all over. Chapter 3. Carrie couldn't believe the day had actually arrived. It hadn't been easy to get her parents to agree to let her go away for the summer. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor were overly protective of their daughter, at least that's what Carrie believed. We'd just like to have you around, her father said. You brighten up the house. Get real, Carrie replied, making a face. He was always saying embarrassing stuff like that. Carrie has eyes as blue as the ocean on a sunny day, he would say. Or, Carrie's hair is as soft and golden as spring sunlight. Dad, give me a break, she would scream. Why does he say such stupid things, she wondered. Despite the fact that she was as willowy and beautiful as any model on the cover of Sassy or 17, Carrie wasn't terribly impressed with her looks. I'm much too skinny, she sometimes thought, or my smile is crooked, or I'm so tired of wearing my hair straight back like this. I wish it wasn't so fine. When guys at school made a fuss over her, or when they acted especially shy around her, Carrie never thought it was because of her looks. She always thought it was because guys just acted that way, basically like jerks. Even though she was 16, she had never had a boyfriend, hadn't gone out on many dates without other kids around, had never even had a guy she was seriously interested in. A few crushes, that was all. The boys are afraid of you, her father said, unable to suppress a proud smile. You're too beautiful. What planet are you from? Carrie had cracked, making an ugly face. She really wished she'd stop making comments like that. Jan is the beautiful one, Carrie thought. Her best friend was dark and mysterious looking, with cascading curly black hair, sparkling olive eyes, high cheekbones, full dramatic lips, and a womanly body that made Carrie feel like a stick. Next to Jan, I'm so pale, so washed out, I almost disappear, Carrie thought. She quickly finished brushing her hair and stepped away from the mirror. She straightened her peach-colored long-sleeved t-shirt, brushed off her white tennis shorts, and was heading down the stairs when the front doorbell rang. They're here, Carrie's younger sister Lauren called. Where's your suitcase? Mr. Taylor shouted. He passed her on the stairway, acting almost frantic. Are you packed? Are you ready? Carrie laughed. Yeah, I'm ready. Isn't anybody going to open the door? Did you remember your toothbrush? Her mother appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking almost as frazzled as Mr. Taylor. The door? Carrie insisted. Somebody opened the door? She pushed past her father and beat her mother to the door. Her sneakers squeaked on the tile floor as she pulled it open. Hi, Jan said, giving Carrie a look that said, What's going on in there? You must be Jan's Aunt Rose, Carrie said to the attractive, middle-aged woman next to Jan. She held the screen door open and noticed that it was a bright, clear June day, so bright that even Fear Street looked summery and cheerful. Nice to finally meet you, Rose said, stepping inside and shaking Carrie's hand vigorously. She was wearing white slacks and a white short-sleeved cotton sweater, which emphasized how tan she was. She had dark, curly hair like Jan's, only not as long. We've talked on the phone so much, and Jan has told me so much about you. I feel like I already know you, Rose said pleasantly. Then she added, I just didn't know you were so beautiful. Carrie felt herself start to blush. She didn't have a chance to reply. Her father had gotten her suitcase and was dragging it into the hallway. The whole family was excitedly talking at once. Only one suitcase? Jan asked Carrie, surprised. I brought a suitcase that big for my makeup. Carrie didn't laugh. Knowing Jan, that was probably not an exaggeration. Jan was wearing a chartreuse midriff top that really emphasized her figure, and skin-tight white spandex bicycle shorts. Well, Jan was never the most subtle person in the world, Carrie thought. But that was what Carrie liked most about her. She was bold. She didn't hold back as Carrie did. Weeks before, when her aunt had first suggested that Jan and some friends go to work at Piney Island, Jan had immediately said what she thought the point of the summer would be, to meet great new guys and to party, party, party. It's going to be a party summer. That was Jan's phrase. Then she invited Eric and Craig, her two oldest boyfriends, to come too, and the two guys picked up on her idea right away. Party summer, they repeated enthusiastically. Carrie couldn't help but notice that Eric was staring at her when he said it. The phrase had repeated itself in Carrie's mind ever since. Party summer. And now she was actually leaving after so many long arguments with her parents. Spend the summer working at a big New England resort hotel by yourself? Mrs. Taylor had seemed absolutely shocked by the idea. I'll go too, Lauren had quickly volunteered. Then she won't be alone. You keep out of it, Mr. Taylor said sharply to Lauren. Uh-oh, here we go again, Carrie said, frowning. Family argument number 224 for the month? You're keeping count? Carrie's mother cracked. I didn't know you could count that high. She had the same wry sense of humor as Carrie, which naturally drove Carrie crazy. It's not an argument, it's a discussion, Mr. Taylor insisted. But I don't want to discuss it, I want to do it, Carrie said impatiently, her blue eyes flashing with anger. Me too, Lauren declared. You weren't invited, Mrs. Taylor said quietly. She turned to Carrie. Sit down, will you? Or if you're going to pace back and forth like that, carry a broom and sweep the floor. You know, make yourself useful. Very funny, Mom. Carrie made a face, but pulled out a chair and joined them at the kitchen table. Now, spell this out again, Mrs. Taylor said, folding her hands in front of her on the yellow Formica table. Who all is going? Well, said Carrie, taking a deep breath and starting all over again. Jan is going, and she's asked me and Eric Bishop and Craig Sethridge. He's a nice boy, Mrs. Taylor said quietly. But isn't Eric the one with the ponytail? Mom, Carrie groaned, rolling her eyes. And the four of you are going to work at this hotel on some island for the summer? Mr. Taylor asked, sounding confused. It's not like we're going to Jupiter, Dad, Carrie snapped. And we're not going alone. Jan's Aunt Rose will be there. She's a writer and needs someplace quiet to finish her book. And if I get to go and work there, I can use the pool and the beach on my time off. Your mother and I used to go to Cape Cod all the time, Mr. Taylor said thoughtfully. But I never heard of this hotel. The Howling Wolf Inn, Mrs. Taylor said, shaking her head. What a name. Sounds like it's out of an old horror movie or something. It's supposed to be really fancy and exclusive, Carrie said defensively. I guess that's why you two never heard of it. Score one for daughter number one, said Mr. Taylor, laughing and making an invisible mark in the air. The inn is on a tiny private island, Carrie continued. Piney Island? There's nothing on the island but the hotel, and the only way to reach it is by boat from Provincetown once a day. Jan says her aunt showed her pictures of it, and it's beautiful. Pine trees grow almost all the way down to the beach. Maybe we'll all go, Mrs. Taylor joked. Carrie made a disgusted face. I want to go swimming, Lauren cried. Lauren, can't you go play or something? Carrie snapped. No, I want to argue too, Lauren insisted. rubbing a dirty finger across the Formica table and staring at the smudge she made. "And I want to go swimming." "Not tonight," Mrs. Taylor told Lauren. "It's almost your bedtime." "And this is really how you want to spend your summer, working and waiting on tables in this big drafty old hotel?" Mr. Taylor asked Carrie, scratching his head. "Yes, and having fun," Carrie said, seeing that her parents were beginning to weaken, and meeting new people, and learning new things, and swimming and vegging out on the beach, and being with my friends, and— "Sounds like that's what she wants," Mrs. Taylor said to her husband. "I guess it does sound better than working at the Sizzler and going to the Shadyside Swim Club on weekends." "Well, let's give Jan's aunt a call and get the details," Mr. Taylor said. He smiled at Carrie. He liked giving in to her. He liked giving her everything she wanted. She had counted on that. Now here it was 4 weeks later, and they were cramming Carrie's bag in the back of Rose's station wagon. There were hugs all around, and a few tears, mainly from Carrie's mother, who still didn't like the idea of Carrie being away for so many weeks, and then more goodbyes, and finally more assurances from Rose that she'd keep a close eye on them. Then they were pulling Lauren out of the back seat of the station wagon, and then the weighted-down car was bumping down the Taylor's driveway, and Carrie was waving to her family, saying a silent goodbye to them, to Fear Street, and to the boring summer she might have had. Both boys were waiting at Eric's house, a rambling ranch-style house in the better section of Shadyside known as North Hills. Eric, as usual, wasn't quite ready. Half of his clothes, consisting of faded denim cutoffs and heavy metal t-shirts, were still stacked in the living room. As Craig, Carrie, and Jan looked on, Eric frantically stuffed things into a canvas bag, which was much too small to hold everything. "My Walkman! Where's my Walkman?" Eric cried wildly, searching the room with his eyes as he continued to shove clothes into his bag. "It's around your neck," Craig said softly, making a face. "Oh, of course. Where else?" Everyone laughed. "Hey, what's that around your neck?" Eric asked Jan. Jan fingered the large white pendant she wore on a silver chain. "Nothing, just an ivory skull. It's supposed to ward off evil." She pushed the skull toward him. "So stay away." "Oh, brother," Eric rolled his eyes. "You're definitely weird, Jan. You really think this hotel is going to be haunted, don't you?" "I'll be very disappointed if it isn't," Jan admitted. Shaking his head, Eric finally managed to jam everything into his bag and zip it. Craig, of course, had packed the night before, and had brought all of his stuff over to Eric's to save Rose from having to make another stop. The two boys are as different from each other as Jan and I are, Carrie thought, watching them load their stuff into Rose's station wagon. They even looked different. Eric was short and thin. He wore an oversized yellow and red Hawaiian shirt over day-glow orange baggies. His dark brown hair was pulled back into a short ponytail. He had a diamond stud in one ear and wore silver wire-rimmed glasses. He's a really nice guy, Carrie thought, but he works so hard at being cool. She had always been a little attracted to Eric. They had been pretty good friends since junior high, but they'd never gone out. Craig was more casual than cool. He kept his blonde brown hair short and neatly parted on the side. He was always dressed nicely, very preppy. That day in khaki, cuffed cotton shorts, and white tennis shirt, but Carrie had the feeling that Craig never gave much thought to what he wore. He's so easygoing. He sort of floats through everything, Carrie thought. In a way, she envied him. He probably never got cold, sweaty hands, or that heavy feeling of drag Carrie often had before a test or a first date. By the time they finished loading, they had luggage stacked to the ceiling of the station wagon, and 2 bags had to be strapped to the roof. "We'd better get going," Rose said, studying her watch. "Summer is almost over." They piled into the wagon, Jan in the front beside her aunt. The 2 boys in back with Carrie squeezed in the middle. "It's so heavy in back, the front wheels are going to fly up in the air," Jan said, turning back to look at Carrie. "Cool," declared Eric. "Do you have enough room back there?" Rose asked, starting the car. "Enough room to do what?" Carrie asked mischievously. Everyone laughed. "I've heard about your sense of humor," Rose said, backing blindly down the drive since there was no way to see out the back window. "Does Carrie have a sense of humor?" Craig teased. "Hey, we're on our way," Eric shouted, rolling down his window. "Goodbye, Shadyside," he shouted. "Party summer, here we come." "Party summer," Craig and Carrie repeated happily. "Wait till you see the beach," Rose said, turning onto River Road, which headed out of town along the Conanoka River. "I haven't been there since I was your age." 5 years ago, Craig interrupted. "Aren't you a sweetheart?" Rose said, laughing. "It was a little longer than that, but I still remember the beach. It had the softest, whitest sand I'd ever seen. And there's a sandbar a short distance from the island that keeps the ocean waves low and gentle. Perfect for swimming." But I brought my surfboard, Eric protested. For sure, dude. Gnarly, Carrie said, doing her best California airhead impression. Gnarlacious, Craig added. You can probably surf on the other side of the island, Rose said. The island is quite small, remember? I hope it's big enough to hold all the really fabulous babes I'm going to meet, Eric said. Guess Eric will be hanging out around the pool all day, Craig said. Yeah, maybe I can be recreation director or something, Eric said, grinning. Recreation director? Is that what they call it these days? Jan asked, rolling her eyes. Tell us more about the hotel, Rose, Carrie said, changing the subject. Yeah, how to get that name, the Howling Wolf Inn, Jan asked, turning around to face the front and adjusting her seatbelt. I don't know, Rose said, turning onto the expressway, the station wagon hesitating under all the weight. We'll have to ask Simon when we get there. I just remember that it's very big. It sprawls out in all directions, and is very beautiful. I remember an enchanting outdoor terrace in the back by the swimming pool. And lots of fabulous babes, Eric said. Eric, give us a break, Carrie pleaded. You guys will have to put in a few hours working, you know, Rose scolded. Party summer, Craig cried. Party summer, Eric took up the refrain. As the miles rolled by, they talked about the hotel, the islands, the beach, and all the things they planned to do, and all the new kids they hoped to meet. Carrie realized that she had never been this excited, never looked forward this much to any summer. Here she was, away for 2 whole months, away from her family, on her own with her best friends, heading to a beautiful, luxurious island resort hotel. Her friends seemed as happy and excited as she was. They rolled toward the Cape, the windows down, the radio blaring, singing along, laughing and talking the whole way. This is already a great summer, Carrie thought. Their happiness didn't fade until they were on the Cape halfway between Wellfleet and Provincetown, and Aunt Rose suddenly fell ill.